Welcome, friends,
to the How-To Heretic.
Now I'm Uncle Mark.
And I'm Uncle Dan.
And I'm Uncle Doug.
And this is your user's guide to life on the outside.
That's right. Leaving religion is the first step into a larger, better world.
But it can also be a scary world. Things work differently now.
Never fear, that's why we're here.
We're your audio uncles. And with help from good friends and experts in all sorts of fields,
we're going to share the stories and seek the knowledge to build a great life.
After all, you only get the one that we know of, so you better make the most of
it. Gentlemen,
hello.
It is another week of the deadly spring we are experiencing,
yes.
and I feel fine.
Absolutely, it's a good time to uncle.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a good time to not parent because those people are going mad with their children at home. Sorry, you guys.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
Should have gotten those tubes tied way back.
The fact that we're recording again means that another week has passed, and that's the only way I know that.
Right?
But what a show. What a show. It's a fun show this week and very informative. Doug, you're going to tell us, you're going to take us to the optometrist.
That's right. I'm going to talk about the vision that was the first of Joseph Smith and the varying versions of that. But really what I'm going to talk about is the dumbest, saddest piece of video ever made.
Oh, you guys, I love it so much.
And Dan, you're going to talk about the longest piece of video ever made.
I am going to talk about, yeah, exactly. I am going to take us down memory lane, all the way down. Oh no, it's still going. That is a long memory lane. Why is it Why is it so long?
It's 40 years long, that memory lane.
Yes, indeed.
And I am going to talk to. We have a wonderful guest this week that for our interview. I'm going to talk to cult expert Steven Hassan, who is going to talk to us about maybe not getting wound up in that sort of shit and what kind of things he does to help people get disentangled. It's a great interview, and stick around for that. And, of course, this week's show is sponsored by the Hosanna Shout. And Doug's going to talk all about it, but the Hosanna Shout, when you try to be happy, but you still end up looking really sad.
And now they've come out with their new Hosanna Shout wipes for in case bad flowers have stained your clothing.
That's right. So let's dive right in.
Woo!
Uncle Dan.
Hi.
As a young man, did you ever venture alone into the wood?
Oh, my God. I did.
Did you?
Can I just tell you that this... Okay, Uncle Doug's about to tell us some shit. And that shit influenced me when I was a kid. And I used to really, 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 as a young Mormon boy, want to have miracles happen to me. And I believed that they could. And so I spent a little bit of time as a teenager after I had dropped out of high school and would stay up alone till 6 in the morning every night. And I would go for long walks and go out, or long drives also, and go out into the woods or whatever, and then assume that God was going to talk to me at some point.
And did he?
I was an idiot. No, I'm a dumbass, and I probably almost killed myself a number of times just wandering through dark woods, hoping that Jesus would talk to me. So it didn't work for me.
You went in there looking for God, and all you got was this boner. Yeah. Well, Doug, what
story
boner
of my life?
What boner are you going to talk about today?
Well, this story turned out well for one young man.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk
until
about,
it didn't.
Until it didn't.
Until it didn't, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, dear uncles, the last time we talked about the subject of Mormon General Conference was in the wake of the last one, October of last year. At that time,
what a time that was!
Oof, boy!
Oh, a heady, glorious moment.
Remember that time where we could be in a room together and shake hands? At that time, prophet, seer, and revelator Russell the Muscle Nelson said the following, quote, General Conference next April will be different from any previous conference. In the next 6 months, I hope that every member and every family will prepare for a unique conference that will commemorate the very foundations of the restored gospel. Now, in hindsight...
It was a unique conference.
Yes,
he did
indeed.
it.
Yeah.
He achieved it.
Yeah, exactly. If the muscle had gone on to say that the reason that this conference would be different was because of an impending viral pandemic, we might have had to acknowledge his role as prophet of God, folded up his podcast and gone home.
Right.
But thankfully, God's own mouthpiece on earth was as much of a dope as the rest of us and didn't see the virus coming. But the reason that this conference was supposed to be the baddest, the sickest, the illest, the most memorable conference in history was because it supposedly marked the bicentennial of the inciting incident of Mormonism, Joseph Smith's first vision, which set in motion the founding of the Mormon religion in upstate New York, which led directly to a territory in Mexico becoming a U.S. state and being represented by sentient mayonnaise stack Mitt Romney and Pillsbury dirt boy Mike Lee. So the reason that this conference was actually memorable is because rather than being held in the Superdome at the Convention Center in front of tens of thousands of, hang on, checking my notes, white people, it was held in an empty chapel.
Wait, hold on. Alex Boyer is there too. Alex Boyer goes.
That's true.
They have a few.
Yeah.
Like probably among the 20,000 that would fit into that room, there are probably at any given moment 2 or 4 brown people.
Boy, I'll tell you what, the camera at conference finds those people pretty quickly.
They have an algorithm. You're below this color on the paint chart, the camera finds you.
That's the most rhythm that any Mormon has ever had. So they did it in an empty chapel this time, adorned with just the saddest flower display this side of the Lawrence Welk show. Did you guys notice that?
God.
How pathetic was that flower display?
I'm pretty sure 6/10 of it was broccoli.
For listeners who don't know, usually the general conference looks like it's being held in a combination funeral home greenhouse, and there is an abundance of foliage that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's generally very nice. Like it's alive and looks arranged in some proper order. This was like a compost heap.
It was so sad.
Yeah.
And as if watching very old white men speak about nothing to an empty room was not sad enough, it was capped off with perhaps the most tragically pathetic thing to be put on film since The Bicycle Thief. I mean, of course, the Hosanna shout.
Oh, I know. Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up.
Oh, my God. It was my everything. I watched it so many times.
The most pitiful thing I've ever seen in my life. I hate those guys, and I felt so much pity for them.
It was. So just to give it a little background, this is a Mormon tradition that goes back to the 1830s, which supposedly accompanies the opening of a new temple. And it is supposed to be the most joyous, rhapsodic, ecstatic thing in all of Mormondom.
Jubilant.
Yeah. So if you want,
I've actually done one of these.
Have you?
And I don't know why. I think they must have rededicated the Salt Lake Temple or something
like that.
Unironically, you did a Hosanna shout.
It was back in those heady days of yore when I was, going out at 4 a.m. and looking for God. But also in the daytime, I would go and do churchy things. And one of those things was I went to, I think it was the Salt Lake Temple. And somebody had told me I had to bring a white handkerchief with me. And I did it. So, Doug, tell the people what this bullshit is, because it's amazing.
Well, if listeners of you have not seen this, pause the podcast.
I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put the link in the show notes. Yeah.
Type in Hosanna shout, President Russell M. Nelson, and strap in. We'll wait. Come on back.
Yeah, when you're back. There's going to be the time before you watch this video and the time after you watch this video. And nothing in your life will matter as much as that milepost, because it is literally. What was the Ernest Hemingway, like the saddest thing ever written in 4 words or 6 words? Baby shoes for sale, never used.
Oh,
this
is
sadder than that by light years.
Yeah,
so
it truly is.
Go ruin everything you believe about life on planet Earth, and then come back to us.
Oh my God! Can I just say that when I experienced it live and in person, there were thousands of people doing it, and it was still stupid. But when you pare that down to 3 nonagenarians, unenthusiastically, sadly doing this thing,
and none of them doing the same thing. So,
first of all, remember they were standing in front of a pile of dead garbage plants in a completely empty room.
Yes.
A room that is so big, they will tell you, for whatever reason, you can put a 747 inside of it.
Oh, no, they're not in that room, though.
Oh, I thought they were at the Supernatural.
No, they did.
They made it look like they were.
They were just in some random ward house, it seemed.
So they so it's a totally empty room, and three men whose combined age is 270 years, right? Three men standing there waving their handkerchiefs out of rhythm,
Yeah.
and trying to like,
And doing a chant that, in the best of times, doesn't mean anything.
Right. So so what you're supposed to do is you take a white handkerchief. It's got to be white because this is Mormonism. And you take it by the corner and you wave it around while saying 3 times, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb. You say that 3 times and then you bring it home with Amen, Amen, and Amen.
yeah.
And
Listeners at home, please understand that what Doug just did was at fast forward speeds
Right.
compared to how it was done by these Mormons all alone up there on a stage.
And I love, Russell Nelson obviously hadn't factored the microphone into the equation, so he kept like flapping the microphone with his handkerchief.
And Oakes was completely out of rhythm.
Oakes wasn't even close.
I like to think of somebody directing it and going, "Okay, guys, great, but I need you to take some emotion out of this. Like, you're at a 9, I need you at a 0. Let's try it again and slow it down."
God.
And it's not just that. I love that it was prefaced by Rusty Nelson saying, "Now, people of the media, we take this very seriously, so you're not allowed to make fun of us, okay?"
Yeah, he did. He basically said, "Treat it with the respect that we do." And it's like, "Oh, sweetie, that's not how anything works."
Right.
And you got to imagine some Mormon teenager stuck in his house with his family, he or she,
They were supposed to do it with them at
watching
home.
his father stand up and wave a fucking paper towel around for 30 seconds. It's got to be like, I don't know about this, guys. This is a little weird.
Literally, all the Mormons were supposed to do this with them at home, which I got to think 40% of them just didn't do it at all.
Yeah.
But
Probably 60% of
60%
them.
did.
And then the rest of them, like, most of them half-heartedly like, "Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed right now."
And also, what are they celebrating? Like, the world is fucking falling apart. You can't even be in the same room together. What is the celebration for?
Well, maybe that's why you use a white handkerchief, because it looks like they're just surrendering.
It does.
If you play it without the sound, it's just 3 old men going, "Please, we give up. We surrender."
Yes, they just surrendered to Jeremy Runnels. That's what's going on.
That's right.
So,
All right. So this isn't even the subject of the segment today. Let's get back to it.
all right.
Do we have to?
This conference was supposed to be this huge celebration of the first vision. We'll talk about that. Of course, how exactly to celebrate it depends a lot on which version you decide to choose.
Right.
As we'll see, there are several versions that differ on all the fundamental points. I hate to say this, but reading these different versions and seeing how the narrative evolved over time to serve Joseph's needs might make me think that he made it up. I'm just putting that out there. So a little context here to all you Nevermo listeners out there.
Yeah.
One of the basic tenets of Mormonism is that it is the restored Church of Christ. That is to say, when Jesus was in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, he set up his perfect church. But soon after his death, this church fell away in apostasy and became the mother of all harlots, the Catholic Church.
Boo.
Boo. They believe that the church that Joseph Smith formed in 1830 in New York, where there are no Palestinians, was the exact church that Jesus set up in the Middle East, where there were no white people. So, this is why Mormons often refer to their church
There's lots of Palestinians in New York. Have you never had like a kebab on the streets?
I mean, upstate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Upstate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
Go to Syracuse and see how many.
Exactly.
None in Troy.
That's why Mormons often refer to it as the restored church. And what set off this restoration was the first vision that took place probably in New York in 1820 or
Point of order.
1818.
No, it didn't.
Or
it didn't take place
1823.
anywhere.
Exactly. Exactly when and where the most important thing to have ever taken place is neither here nor there. or maybe over there. Anyway, Joseph was born in December of 1805 in Vermont, and sometime in 1816 or 1817, his family moved to Palmyra, New York. This region would eventually be called the Burned Over District. We've talked about this a lot because there were so many religious revivals sweeping through that region, and it was a particularly gullible population. Such
You
that
couldn't stop someone from creating a religion there.
Yeah, I mean there were hundreds just sweeping through.
Yeah, you throw a seed in the ground and an Adventist just pops up. It was that fertile.
If you sneezed, you'd suddenly have started the Church of the Eternal Achoo.
Yeah.
And it's such that the period of time was actually referred to as the Second Great Awakening. I didn't bother looking up the first because I don't care. Indeed, Joseph's grandfather, mother, and father all claim to have had visions and dreams. In fact, at that time and at that place, if you weren't having visions, something was definitely wrong with you. So let's start out talking about the first vision by laying out all of the things that the different versions agree on, and then we'll talk about how they differ.
All
Ready?
Right. Yep.
Joseph Smith claimed to have had a vision. Okay, great. Now let's go.
Well, and they were all in the woods.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, not all of them.
Oh, right. That's right.
Suck it, Mark.
Yeah. Yes, I forgot. Go on.
So let's talk about the different versions now. It's worth mentioning that in several versions, Joseph takes care to mention that the man or men speaking to him were definitely white and even had blue eyes. So,
did he really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's nice.
Like people in Palestine did.
Exactly. The four main accounts are the 1832, the 1835, the 1838, which would go on to be kind of the main version, and then the 1842 account. However, there are tons of other accounts from people who knew Joseph over the years, and unsurprisingly, they all differ wildly. These include versions like from the likes of Orson Pratt or Orson Hyde, Levi Richards or Alexander Nybar, among many others. So let's start with the 1830. Well, actually, before we get to the 1832 version, there was a very passing mention in 1830 that Joseph made about what would go on to be kind of known as the first vision. And it's just a passing quote. It's this, quote, "For after that it truly was manifested unto Smith," and this is Joseph talking in the third person, "that he had received remission of his sins. He was entangled again in the vanities of the world, but after truly repenting, God visited him by an holy angel and gave unto him power by the means which was before prepared that he should translate a book." Okay. That was in 1830. There's not a lot to that version, just that God showed up, just God. The 1832 version was written by Joseph Smith himself, and this is kind of the first of the four main versions. However, crazy, this version was kept hidden until it was accidentally, or perhaps on purpose, leaked to Jared and Sandra Tanner, who then published it in 1965. So, again, this is in 1832. Joseph wrote this down, didn't see the light of day until 1965. It was written by Joseph, and you can kind of see the story coming into shape, right? Mm-hmm. He goes out, he's praying, he sees a pillar of light that ascends on him. God appears, just God, tells him that his sins are forgiven, which is kind of an important point, and that the inhabitants of the earth have turned away from God, and then God closes with something I have said all too often, "Behold and lo, I come quickly." The 1834 Oliver Cowdery version actually
I've always said, "Come quickly, come low."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Words to live by.
Yep.
That's on our family crest in Latin.
It's because you don't want to get them in the eye.
Right.
Burns.
The 1834 Oliver Cowdery version actually conflates the first vision with the appearance of Moroni in 1823 in Joseph's bedroom to tell him about the golden plates. So Oliver Cowdery, who knew Joseph very well, puts the vision in the bedroom in 1823, not 1820. And that's what, Joseph would go on to tell a story about how Moroni showed up. Notably, it is the angel Moroni that's on all the temples around the country. You see the golden figure with the trumpet. Mm-hmm. And
soon to not be on the Salt Lake Temple, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't think of a better sign of the apocalypse than the recent earthquake, which caused Moroni to drop his trumpet.
It was worth it.
So,
the whole earthquake was worth it because of that.
Yeah. Okay. In his diary in 1835, Joseph recounted the vision again, and for the first time mentions two personages, but they were accompanied by many angels. They still forgave him of his sins, but no mention about the next piece, which is all the churches being corrupt. This brings us to the 1838 Smith account. This version was dictated by Smith himself and would later be canonized into the Pearl of Great Price, which is neither a pearl or actually very expensive, and become the official version of the church. This is the one we were told when we were kids. In this version, Joseph was caught up in the religious revivals going around at the time, but was unsure which sect to join. So one night, while reading the only book his family owned, a King James version of the Bible, Joseph read this passage from the Epistle of James, chapter 1, verse 5, quote, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." And can I just say, upbraideth is just a stupid word. I'm sorry. Motivated by that scripture.
Are you upbraiding about it?
I am upbraiding, upbraideth. Motivated by that scripture, one morning in 1820, Joseph went to a grove and began to pray. Suddenly he was accosted by some dark force that prevented Joseph from speaking and gave him the sense that he would be destroyed. I don't know what that sense feels like, but he had it.
Really? I feel it pretty much every day.
Just fair enough. Then a bright light, brighter than even the noonday sun, descended upon him and drove the evil away. Smith saw, quote, two personages standing in the air above him. The two personages were so full of glory that they defy description, which is awfully convenient.
Unless you would need to talk about their race, in which case, no problem.
What color their eyes were. One of these men pointed to the other and intoned the infamous words that Donald Trump has neither heard nor spoken. "This is my beloved son."
Oh, you took me on a journey. I did not know where that was going. Oh, shit.
Although it's never explicitly defined, this is clearly meant to be God the Father and Jesus Christ. And I've never really understood why it was necessary for God to introduce Jesus here. Was descending from the sky on a pillar of light not enough to establish credibility?
Well, it's just manners.
So, what's also strange here, and I didn't realize this till I read this account again, at least according to this account, is that Jesus doesn't say anything at that point. Joseph gathers up the nads to ask which church to join.
Well, his dad kind of takes up the room. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's got a personality.
But he's like, "Hey, this is Jesus," and Jesus just kind of stands there staring at Joseph. So Joseph gets up the nads, asks the question, and pardon me. However, the answer to the question is that none of the churches are true; they are all false. One of the two goes on to say, quote, "They draw near me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof." So they commanded Joseph not to join any church. And then, quote, "Many other things did he say to me, which I cannot write at this time." Sure. You can't describe him, and you can't say what he said. Sure, Joseph.
Yeah, and you've got a girlfriend in Canada. We got you. Yeah.
But in this account, and in the accounts going forward, the forgiveness of Joseph's sins is no longer part of the narrative. So the kind of evolved. The story starts out with this person or personages forgiving his sins, and then it morphed into two people telling him all the churches were corrupt, right? That's kind of the evolution of the story.
Right.
The last two most prominent versions of the first vision are the 1840 Orson Pratt account and the 1842 Wentworth letter that Joseph penned and sent to the Chicago Democrat. Both these versions are basically abbreviated versions of the 1838 account and focus on the two personages and the fact that all the churches were corrupt. Again, no mention of the remission of sins. Of course, this is totally consistent with the idea that Joseph made it up and embellished and altered it over time to suit his needs, and that in the intervening years, his movement has punched up his origin story to make it more dramatic.
How dare you?
Apologists, however, have taken a slightly different take. One of the churches on the church's own website, they say that all the varying versions of the first vision are proof of its veracity, because the differing accounts are consistent with how one remembers an event over time. This is, of course, ridiculous. Memory may be a fickle mistress, but the car was traveling westbound or it was not. It ran the stop sign or it didn't. And even if memory is ephemeral, it buggers credulity that if God himself appeared and spoke directly to you, you would forget to mention that there was a guy standing next to him the whole time, or forget entire sections of what he had to say. And most contemporaries of Joseph had no idea that Joseph Smith had a first vision. Right? This obviously grew over time, and given its importance and certainly how important it is to the modern Mormon Church, you think you would have talked about it more. But what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And the first vision was part of Joseph's much longer and larger, origin story and mythos. But it wasn't until the 20th century that it wove its way into everyday life of Mormons the way it has now. And I remember, you guys obviously remember when we were kids, the first vision was a big fucking deal.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember we got to do a segment just on this. But do you remember those
I guess
projectors?
The dioramas?
No, I love the dioramas. I was going to say the projectors.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So this must have been a thing outside of Mormonism. They couldn't have just been a Mormon invention. But there were those. You're talking about the little single advance, like that you turn the knob, and the sound was always fucked up. But that little projector was
I had those in school too.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the projector was as hot as the center of the fucking sun.
But if you got to be the kid who got to turn, who would advance it after every, you were the luckiest kid alive.
Yeah.
And then you were treated for third-degree burns on your hands. It was the fucking cornballer of Mormonism.
Totally. But yeah, so when we were kids, there were various videos and slideshows of the first vision and the importance of it. And I never knew there were more versions until long, long after I left the church.
Of course not.
Yeah.
No. The Mormons themselves don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
They know the approved version of the story, and that is all.
Well, Doug, I sent you that article that was an apologist article about how the multiple versions actually prove it's more true?
Yeah. And it basically... Yeah, I know, exactly. And it's, if all you got is a hammer, make lemonade. But it's pretty stupid. So yeah, it happened in either 1818, 1820, 1821. It might have happened in a forest. It might have happened in a bedroom. There might have been one person. There might have been two. There might have been many. They said one thing. They said another. Or they said something else entirely. All it makes is sense.
It makes a sense.
I think to celebrate this beautiful story, we should all end on a Hosanna shout. And I think that we should all do it together. Do you have your hankies in hand?
I'm ready.
Yeah, ready.
Okay, here we go. Hosanna.
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 To God
and the Lamb. Amen.
Hosanna.
Click.
That's a lot of activity for men of that age.
Let's all go take a nap, and then we'll come back and do the rest of the show.
All right. See you in the forest.
Thanks, Uncle Doug.
Bye.
Uncle Mark.
Yes.
In this time of quarantine,
yes, quarantine.
One is tempted to dig into the classic catalog, the Criterion Collection, and
cinema.
Yeah, visit some old cinema that hasn't been viewed in a while.
I watched Nacho Libre the other night because I was anxious and just needed to turn my brain off, and fucking hell did it work. And then last night I watched David Lynch's director's cut of Dune.
Oh,
ooh.
Yeah,
how delightful!
So yes, I have been fiddling around in
Uncle
cinema.
Mark, I do believe that movie was directed by one Alan Smithy.
It was until David Lynch decided to put his name on it again.
Until he decided to admit to it.
Yes, exactly. So
I love that movie. We should do it. We should do a segment on just that. But Uncle Dan, you have a classic piece of cinema you'd like to talk about today?
Indeed. Well, fellas, it's springtime. And,
you bet it is.
As we speak, we are recording today on Easter Sunday.
Isn't it pronounced Esther?
Erster.
Erster, yeah. I'll agree to disagree.
Which is, of course, the holiday when the American atheists are supposed to have their convention, but too bad.
And Lucian Greaves' visit to UVU is supposed to be this week as well.
Yeah.
Boo. We got screwed out of all the good things.
We don't like coronavirus.
Anyway, Easter's also the holiday when millions of good Christians participate in the long-held tradition of gathering as a family and watching a movie about Passover. That's right.
A holiday they stole.
Right, yeah, exactly. So today I'm not going to do a Bible story. Today I'm doing a story of a guy doing a Bible story. My subject is that almost 4-hour deep voice yelling contest, Cecil B. DeMille's Cast of Thousands epic, The Ten Commandments.
Yay!
Bum, 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 bum.
Massive racist Cecil B. DeMille.
Yes, indeed. But everybody was a massive racist back then. Come on.
I was going to
Cut him
say,
some slack.
everyone in history was a racist asshole. There's just nothing
Yes,
around
that's right. Guys, on this show, we have talked a lot about the events and characters and really stupid rules that came out of the book of Exodus. Like, a lot. Too much?
It's one of our favorite subjects.
Nah, couldn't be too much. Just the right amount. Anyway, I feel like one of the biggest reasons we've gone so in-depth on the subject is that this movie got under the skin of Americans, the American movie-going public, in a way that few other movies have. I mean, it's like 10 Commandments and Ernest Goes to Camp, and that's about it. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up watching this movie. I played it on TV. It played on TV around this time every year, and one year we used up 6 or 7 VHS tapes recording it so that we could watch it whenever we wanted to. So that turned out to be quite a bit. Not sure what I liked so much about it. Maybe it was the cartoonishness of the whole thing, the crazy overacting and insanely bright colors. Maybe it was the overly grand nature of the production. Or maybe it was just Ann Baxter in all those gauzy dresses. Who knows?
Oh, man.
We'll never be able to tell. But whatever it was, I watched it a bunch of times as a little guy.
Yeah, those barely covered gossamer tits were like the first boner I ever had.
Right?
It's funny. I don't remember those.
Really?
Yeah, not really.
More of a Ramses kind of guy?
I feel like I had a little more going for Ramses there.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
We were
I like the winning team.
Well, there you go. So let's talk about this grand piece of cinema that cost more to make than any movie before it and won not 2, not 3, not 4, but 1 Oscar for Best Special Effects.
Is that true?
Yeah. Don't worry, though. This powerful piece of filmmaking also won Best Picture of the Month for the whole family by the Box Office Blue Ribbon Awards for the month of January in 1957. So,
wow, how about that?
High praise.
No slouch.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the film so huge it literally killed its maker. Cecil B. DeMille had a long track record of making biblical/religious films. Hell, The Ten Commandments was actually a remake of a silent film he made by the same name back in 1923.
Well, if it ain't
Other
broke.
big religious epics included King of Kings, which is really the one that Christians should be watching around Easter, it being about Jesus and his death and resurrection and all, but whatever. He made Samson and Delilah, The Sign of the Cross. He was a devoted Episcopalian, except for all the extramarital affairs, and also he was a staunch conservative, unless he was supporting Franklin Roosevelt. He opposed unions, except apparently for the ones that he belonged to or tried unsuccessfully to start. So, complicated guy.
Consistent is what I like about him.
If there's one thing we can say for him, it's consistency. And the guys at Paramount...
Cecil be consistent.
The guys at Paramount, the company that he started and then left and then came back to, can tell you that that's the case. But he did love his churchy movies, and The Ten Commandments was his tour de force. With a record-breaking production budget of $13.2 million, which is the equivalent to roughly $125 million of today's dollars, the film the massive film, included a literal cast of thousands. Well, actually, do you count extras as cast, Mark? Help me out with that one.
Generally not, but
Okay.
but they sometimes do when they're making like epics like that.
Sure. I would say a cast of tens, but like extras numbering a lot. Anybody want to guess at like how many extras were used in the large crowd scene?
For some reason, I have the number 4,000 in my head.
3,999.
Neither of you went over 14,000 extras in this fucking film. and 15,000 animals. So,
Wow.
Listen, anyone who's ever been on a film set with a crowd sized more than 30 people knows that that's too many to wrangle.
Yeah, but I can
that's
testify to that
crazy.
fact. Once you get above 100, it is fucking bedlam.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the fact that I guess it's not that surprising that he did have a heart attack in the middle of one of the big crowd scenes. It's just too much. But that was DeMille's game, so he played it better than anybody.
Yeah, he did go big.
Yeah, exactly. And they filmed those scenes actually in Egypt. So DeMille was sure to have that stunning authenticity.
Wow.
I mean, where else is a guy based in Southern California going to find a bunch of barren desert wasteland? So let's get to the film itself. It opened in 1956. After an exclusive premiere event in New York, the film went on the road, going from city to city in a roadshow style rather than having a nationwide opening. Anybody want to guess where the first city was that tour landed?
Topeka.
The place where the Ten Commandments opened, against the
Memphis.
will of the studio, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Holy shit.
Really?
Yeah.
No
It
kidding.
opened here?
DeMille thought that if he could get the serious-minded Mormons to like it, then every kind of religious weirdo would like it. And we'll talk more on DeMille and the Mormons later on.
Wow,
Interesting.
Finally, we're on the map.
Right? And we have the first KFC. We're killing it.
That's right.
Wow.
All right. And he was right, by the way, about that. The film grossed more than any other film that year, and then it just kept going. First of all, it continued this roadshow-style run until mid-58, so that's almost 2 years after it premiered.
Wow.
And then it had a successful general opening. Then it was re-released in the theaters in 66, and again in 72, and again in 89.
Jesus.
Though there's some disagreement about where it ranks, if you adjust for inflation, it's easily in the top 10 of the highest grossing films of all time.
No
And if
kidding.
you don't adjust for inflation, then to hell with you. The movie, as I said before, is a lavish production with remarkable special effects for the time, including the Pillar of Fire, the parting of the Red Sea, and the changing of the white people into Middle Easterners / Africans. So all of those really impressive things.
Yeah. They turned a bunch of white anti-Semite Hollywood actors into Jews. It's kind of a miracle. Yeah.
It was one of the things that they won the Oscar for.
You're right.
It's replete with famous lines spoken in only the manliest of voices, except for the
Places by
aforementioned
my
Anne
side,
Baxter.
Nefertiti.
Right? Examples include, "So let it be written, so let it be done," and "Your fragrance is like the wine of Babylon," which was maybe my favorite thing I've ever heard him say.
So fucking
Babylon.
awesome.
And of course, the most famous of them all, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." In its theatrical release, the film opened with DeMille himself emerging onto an empty stage from behind some curtains to speak directly to the audience. He tells us that this is the story of the birth of freedom. The theme of this picture, he says, because it's always a good idea for a storyteller to explicitly state his theme.
Tell, don't show. That's the
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He says the theme of this picture is whether a man ought to be ruled by God's law or whether they are to be ruled by a dictator like Ramesses. And that's how he pronounced it, Ramesses. He apparently did not see any kind of irony in that statement, God being the ultimate dictator, and also, like, if you just read a little bit further in that Bible of his, all of those Jews become slave owners, but whatever.
Yeah.
So that was a weird thing for DeMille to do, to open his movie with
I was a showman.
him.
Yeah.
He was apparently trying to make sure that nobody missed the connection between his movie and the evils of Soviet communism. This was 100% a Cold War film. Yul Brynner's Ramses was Stalin and or Mao, and Chuck Heston, the deliverer from bondage, was America. Yay! Strangely, the first 5 hours of the film, okay, the first hour and a half, but man, it's a long film, are basically entirely non-biblical. It covers roughly 10 verses of Exodus chapter 3, but that doesn't mean that it was all bullshit. Well, it does, but not like a lot of people think. So yes, the first hour and a half, almost no Bible, but DeMille himself actually claimed in the opening preamble to the film that he had used other sources to fill in a lot of the gaps in Moses' life. These included Josephus and Philo, who were ancient historians that DeMille was convinced had access to ancient documents that are now lost to us. He also used the Jewish Midrash, which I really don't know if that's a plural or not, a bunch of biblical writings by ancient rabbis, and he had more rabbis consulting on the work. So, all that extra biblical, air quotes, scholarship doesn't actually mean that the story in the Ten Commandments is any more authentic, mind you. It's just that now he's using some ancient historians' made-up stories about an even ancienter character as a supplement to the existing stories, which are also almost certainly made up. Also, he did just make a bunch of shit up because, what's a movie if it doesn't have a sexy love triangle?
Well, you're not going to pull a 4-hour movie off of like one half of one chapter of a book without some extrapolation.
Well, now, mind you, we have. I managed to squeeze 3 episodes of our show out of.
I think it was 4.
Oh God, it never ended. Yeah. So if he had just stuck to the Bible, he could have done the movie, but no, he decided he needed a whole bunch of exposition to make sure that we understood. I don't know. I'm not sure what.
I am a stranger in a strange land.
Right, exactly. Oh, I promised there would be more Mormon connections, so I got to get to those. So I'll start with this. Speaking of Anne Baxter's sexy, gauzy gowns, Edith Head got an Oscar nomination for the costumes. Edith Head gives good costume. But she wasn't the only person listed in that nomination. Her whole team was named, including one surprising addition. Former Mormons listening to our show may recognize the name Arnold Freiberg.
Oh, yeah.
But Freiberg wasn't a costume designer. He was a painter. He did all the wildly and maybe inadvertently homoerotic paintings of the Book of Mormon characters that have graced so many of the Mormon handbooks through the years.
I bet you remember those, Mark.
Homoerotic.
Yeah. Whether he intended it or not, it was many a young boy's first boner.
Yeah, and also his other subjects that he loved to paint were Canadian Mounties and Boy Scouts. So make of that what you will.
Right. Well, apparently what DeMille made of it was that it was he was amazing because DeMille had did a nationwide search for somebody to do concept art for the film before production, and Freiberg fit the bill to a T. Freiberg, and so because DeMille loved his art so much, Edith Head used his images to create her costumes. Therefore, he was credited
in the costume department.
In the costume department.
Well, and it's funny because some of the costumes are just robes, most of them. But Yul Brynner as Ramses II, his armor is fucking legit. There's that scene near the end where he's going to go chase Moses, and he just stands in his throne room and puts his arms outstretched, and his slaves come in and just kind of assemble his armor on him.
Yeah, he was like the original Iron Man.
Fantastic. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how I dress every morning. What are you talking about? I just stand there and my servants come and adorn me.
You know you've made it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, apparently Freiberg. That's how that was one Mormon connection. Is that Arnold Freiberg got credit for being on the team, on Edith Head's team. Huh. Speaking of promotional material, by the way, and I should say, sorry, that DeMille used Freiberg's work at the end as he was distributing the film as promotional material for the film as it was touring around. Which, by the way, I got to tell you, if you listen to Thank God I'm Atheist or The Scathing Atheist or any current event shows about religion, you really should listen to Thank God I'm Atheist, by the way. It is fantastic. They've got this one guy who's great. Anyway,
Frank's tremendous.
Isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, just really, really nice. Anyway, you'll know that there are constant First Amendment battles being fought all over America over the placement of the 10 Commandments, stone tablets type things, just like the ones in the movies, on government grounds.
Yep, we've talked about it on our show as well, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That shit all started because of DeMille.
That's
and
right.
And the studio who sent those things out as publicity stunts to cities and states before the film came there. So
that's right.
Thanks for that little constitutional crisis, Cecil. Appreciate that. More Mormon stuff. The voice of God in the burning bush in the film is that of one Chuck Heston, which, how masturbatory is that? He's talking to his own self. Or maybe that's what we're all doing when we talk to God.
Hello, Charles. Well, hello, Charles.
Anyway, so think of that what you will, but there was another God voice in the movie, and that's in the scene where Moses gets the tablets. And it was the voice of one Jesse Jukes, a bass in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Really?
And they even used one stop of the tabernacle organ to add some boom to it. Now, how did Cecil DeMille get access to that organ and that bass? Well, he was friends with Mormon President David O. McKay.
Really?
Huh.
Yeah. Apparently, when you make biblical movies, it's useful to have a friendly relationship with the leadership of many different religions.
Yeah,
and
no
DeMille
doubt.
was 100% on board with that.
Boy, Cecil be sucking up.
100%. But he seems to have had a special affinity for McKay, which is likely why the film opened in Salt Lake, and also why, in 1957, DeMille gave the commencement address and was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Letter degree from Brigham Young University. And in that address,
the Trump
he praised,
University of its time.
I think we keep finding that all roads lead to BYU.
well,
Idaho.
all the unluckiest ones do anyway.
Yeah, all the shitty roads.
Yeah. In that address that he gave, the commencement speech that he gave, he praised Brother McKay and said that he had, quote, almost made me a Mormon, which in my mind is probably one of the heaviest leanings on the word almost of all time. Anyway, I thought I'd close out by offering you guys the chance to both do your Charlton Heston impressions, because I know you want to. So I want to hear it. Let's whip it out. Do your best. Let my people go.
All right, Doug, go ahead.
Ramses, let my people go. That was fucking terrible.
That was John Wick. Okay, there we go. Ramses, let my people go.
Moses.
Well, that's Yul Brynner.
I know. I love
That's
Yul
Ann
Brynner.
Baxter.
Where's
So
you got
Dan,
now, huh?
Dan, you're going to kill it. Dan's got a good Heston.
Okay, I'll give it a try. Ramses, let my people go. Yeah.
Soylent Green is my people.
Let my Soylent Green be made of people.
I think we have a winner, and
right.
I, for one, would just like to thank the Academy.
All right,
Well done. You and not Mr. DeMille, unfortunately.
You know, by the way, Uncle Dan, if you want to blow your mind, go to Edward G. Robinson, who plays Dathan.
Yes, indeed.
If you go to his IMDb page, it is incredible.
Oh, he was in everything. He was in everything.
The 1930s to like the 1970s. He was in up to, I think he was in 7 movies in 1 year, but like 3 or 4 movies a year.
Oh, and he was
Well,
a
that's the
reliable
studios
bad
used to
guy.
like literally. They used to own people essentially,
Yeah.
so you just had to be in every movie the studio wanted to put you in. Like you didn't really have a choice. You just went from stage 1 to 2 to 3 in the same day. You know.
Yeah. I read a whole thing about, and there was a limited pool of actors, period. I read a thing about DeMille not wanting to cast anybody who had already worked on a competing studio's show, Prince of Egypt or something of Egypt, because it was basically the same fucking thing. But still 4 people made it in. He had 4 actors who were in
when
both
you got
shows.
14,000 people, like, there's going to be some crossover. So
Yeah, but most of those people were probably actually like brown people from the Middle East because he shot out there. So
that's so insane. All right, well, that was wonderful. And
Yes, there you go.
maybe I'll watch it tonight and live tweet it. Who knows? But with that, let's move on out of Egypt.
Let's move on.
let's go. Okay, fellas, listen up.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. A lot of people are struggling. A lot of people are hurting out there in the world right now. There's a virus going around. I understand. I haven't seen it myself, but
antibiotics used to cure everything, but this one's just too
this
genius.
one's squirrely.
It's too genius.
It's such a smart little germ.
Yeah.
It'll get past your basic antibiotics.
That's right.
So some people out there have heeded the call, the clarion call, and decided to give us a little bit of their money so that we don't all starve to death, sad and alone in our homes.
Doug.
We'll starve to death with somebody, except Uncle Doug.
Let's starve to... Look, if you're with somebody, you're never really going to starve to death, are you?
Not if you're faster.
That's right.
Not if you kill them first.
That's right.
Anyway, we have a bunch of folks to thank who have decided to pony up, and they're the best. So first, thanks to Featherfoot McGee.
Yep.
Eric, to Esther.
Esther is our dear friend and frequent correspondent. Thank you so much, Esther, for patronage.
Thanks to Katie, to Dave, to NQR, and we have some saints we need to dole out. Also, a quick honorable mention. Thanks to Tanner for coming back. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Tanner. And Tanner had already been in heaven and returned, and his great. This heaven now has extra monkeys. But Tanner, in exchange for returning, asked that we just plug Bryce Blankenagel's new Mormon-themed D&D podcast, which I have not listened to yet because that is way too autobiographical.
Yeah, right.
So thanks, Tanner. Thanks, Tanner. And of course, as always, Bryce, you're awesome.
Yeah. So we need Uncle Doug. I'm going to give you the task of giving a saint to Catherine.
Okay, Catherine, your saint, your patron saint is Saint Clementinus of the Falkland Islands. Oh. She is the patron saint of all citrus-based jams and jellies, the patron saint of suspicious sneezes, which right now is all sneezes, and sand dunes that measure above 2 meters.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you went metric on that. That helps. And I will give a saint to Fallon, who gets... Fallon, your patron saint is Saint Barnabas of Curitiba, Brazil, who is the patron saint of overlarge vegetables, things that help you swim, including water wings and fins, but not snorkels for some reason, and the patron saint of attempted airplanes or attempted flying machines.
Oh, good. Like the famous flops, like the wonderful old flops.
Yeah. Anything that tried to like flap its wings or never actually made it off the ground, all of those.
All of those black and white things.
Yeah,
exactly.
All the oldie-timey disasters.
Yeah. And Uncle Mark, you're going to need to do one for Jade.
Okay, Jade, you, of course, will receive the lifelong protection from Saint Visela of Rigel 7. And she is the patron saint of catapultists.
Sure.
Perpetual fabulists, and any and all miracles on ice.
Question: is a catapultist the person who pulls the lever or the person who's in the catapult?
Thanks for asking. I think that's important. It's the person who pulls the lever.
Okay.
The person who's catapulted is called the passenger. Yeah.
And wasn't Rigel 7 a pleasure planet?
I don't know. It's just like the most Star Trek thing I can ever say is Rigel 7.
It's getting too nerdy in here.
It's getting too nerdy.
We need to escape. But before we do, thanks to all of you so much for your kind and generous donations.
For sure.
Yeah.
And if any of you out there would like to join these people in their in that generous mood, please go to howtoheretic.com and find the things you need to click and
support us.
And get to the Patreon page, and you sign up at whatever level you want, and we sure do appreciate it.
Yeah, start hitting the 9, and then just put a table leg on the 9 and walk away, and just keep her going. So, and if you can't do that, and I know it's tough out there for everybody, but 5 stars are free.
Yeah, that's right.
And anywhere you can give us 5 stars, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, we're on Spotify. Please do. It just helps more people get access to the show, and hopefully our particular ray of bullshit-scented sunshine might help some people out there as well. So help make that happen if you can.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Let's move on. Friends, we're really fortunate to have a guest on today that is America's foremost expert on cults, how they form and how they operate. Steven Hassan is a licensed mental health professional and the founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, and the author of several books, including Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs, and most recently, The Cult of Trump. I can't even imagine what that's about. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. So, you and I have a bit in common. We were both raised in high-demand religions, and I would say arguably cults. Our listeners will know my background is an extremely conservative siege mentality Mormonism, but they may not be familiar with what you were up to in the 70s while I was doing baptisms for the dead. Can you give us a little intro to your background with cults?
Yeah, absolutely. One correction: I, unlike you, was not raised in a cult, but I was recruited into the Moonies when I was 19 and a college student at Queens College, and I wound up coming to believe that the Messiah was on the earth. He was this fat Korean billionaire with a gun factory, and who did mass weddings. 30,000 couples at one time was his record of assigning people to marry one another. But
Were you married in that, Stephen?
No, fortunately, I was considered to be too young to be in one of them, but I was identified as a rising leader and indoctrinated to be a leader in the American cult, which left me feeling very guilty when I woke up after my deprogramming and got out. But
right.
the point is that I experienced a radical personality change, a radical change of my beliefs. I was a poetry major in college. I was asked to throw out all my poetry to show my allegiance to God.
And you did, didn't you? You discarded all of your work. Oh, my God.
And cut off from my family, dropped out of college, thought Armageddon was going to happen in 1977. And my family and friends were horrified because I was very educated, very bright. I had skipped 8th grade. I was an extra honor student. And they couldn't talk to me. It just, you're brainwashed. You're in a cult. And of course, I didn't think I was in a cult. And I was convinced that they were being manipulated by Satan. And I got out after a near fatal van crash where I fell asleep at the wheel of the van and drove it in the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, which led to 2 weeks in the hospital and operation and deprogramming that my family arranged. It started involuntarily and then it went voluntary, not because I wanted to leave the group or I had any doubts. I had zero doubts. But I wanted to prove to my family I wasn't brainwashed. So I agreed to listen and learn. And fortunately, I woke up and went, oh my God, this is Chinese communist brainwashing techniques and strategies. And then I became literally obsessed with wanting to understand, how did this happen to me? And how did that happen to Patty Hearst? How did it happen to Jim, later to Jim Jones's People's Temple? And I became a mental health professional in 85. I got my master's degree, currently in a doctoral program at age 65, because I want to change the legal system if I can, or at least help it change to understand brainwashing and mind control.
Right. That car accident could not be a more literal road to Damascus moment, could it? That's the moment it all changed for you.
Well, it opened the door to my family knowing where I was, because they didn't know where I was, and I had crutches and a cast on my right leg from my toes to my groin. So the initial deprogramming, they took my crutches away, and I couldn't fight and I couldn't run away. So
you were stuck.
It made it a lot more doable, because I was trained in martial arts in the cult, and I would have done a lot of violence because I was that programmed.
Oh my God! So as you say, when you after you were deprogrammed and you left the cult, the three of us are all former Mormons on this show, and after having left what I consider, my experience was a cult. Like you, I think I'm endlessly fascinated by the phenomenon of dangerous and irrational beliefs that we've done a bunch of segments on, like your old friends, the Moonies. We've done Am Shinrikyo, the People's Temple, of course. Lots of cults that are kind of the dragon's teeth out here in Mormon country, like the Family of David and Warren Jeffs and the Short Creek polygamists, Elizabeth Smart's kidnapper, Brian David Mitchell. Mm-hmm. And then a ton on the outside, like the Divine Light Mission, the Solar Temple, Westboro Baptists, MLMs, we kind of run the gamut. But before I get to the cult that really kind of drove our listeners around the bend, you developed, when you left the Moonies and became a healthcare professional, you developed a system by which you could kind of measure whether something was a cult or not. Is that correct?
Not exactly, but I'll explain. So Robert J. Lifton, a psychiatrist, had written the seminal volume called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism about Chinese communist brainwashing programs. And he outlined 8 criteria that any environment may be judged as a brainwashing, or he preferred the term thought reform environment. Mm-hmm. And then Margaret Singer came up with a model of 6 conditions, but both models just didn't really work as well as I wanted something to work. And I was exposed in my research about psychology to Leon Festinger's work, which is cognitive dissonance theory. He actually wrote a book in 1956 called When Prophecies Fail, about a UFO cult. And he studied with his students this cult, and he wondered why people, when the spaceship didn't come to the mountaintop as prophesied, why people believed more and not less.
Right.
So he posited this theory, which has since been validated for decades, that we have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And as human beings, we like to be congruent. We like to have alignment between our beliefs, our feelings, and our behaviors. And if you can get someone to change their behavior radically, they're going to change their beliefs and rationalize to explain the radical behavior. And likewise, their feelings will fall in alignment. So I took those 3 criteria, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and I said, let's look at, like the Moonies and how they recruit and indoctrinate. So I started listing all the behavioral control elements and all of the thought control elements and then the emotional control elements. And I'm like, I'm onto something here, because this really helps to organize this. But there was another thing that was missing. It took me a while to figure it out, but it was information control. And because I would never have gotten into the cult if I hadn't been lied to by my recruiters, and lied in the sense of withholding vital information, distorting information to make it more palatable, and outright lying, like they said they weren't religious. They weren't in a religious group, when in fact
the Moonies told you that.
Yeah, the recruiters of the Moonies told me that.
Wow.
Yeah, and I later, as a recruiter, did it to other people, because that's what was done to me.
Right.
So the whole lack of informed consent is a huge identifying mark for any destructive cult. And
Right.
and I guess that there's more elements to information control about spying on each other, using information about your past against you, to keep you in line. There's a whole list of it. And in fact, pertaining to the Mormons, I did a podcast with John DeLynn, and I asked him to read Combating before we did the interview. And he basically texted me and said, "Your book is blowing my mind." And the next thing I know is I get the bite model color coded by John, which I had never thought to color code it, but he added a new dimension to it, where he said things like "not really practiced by the LDS Church," or especially with the missions, with the 2-year missions, this is present. And yes, it exists in the LDS Church, or it doesn't. So that exists on my freedomofmind.com website for anyone who wants to look at the color-coded bite model for the Mormons. So going back to your question, I also have something referred to as the influence continuum, which is on my website as well and in my books, where if you think about it, ethical influence is on one side and unethical influence is the other side. And so I do take the position that there can be cults that are not authoritarian, destructive cults. They're just wacko, weirdo groups that you're really into. But you're not lied to get into it. You're free to leave. You're free to read whatever you want to read, talk to ex-members or whatever. You have complete conscience and critical thinking intact. Whereas destructive authoritarian cults practice the bite model to the extreme, where they give you a black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil thought frame, where we know the truth and everyone else is in darkness. They have these behavioral codes, which could include change of clothing and diet and where you sleep and who you can associate with, and needing to ask permission for major life decisions, with an emphasis on obedience and dependency on the leader, the doctrine, or the policies of the group. And then, of course, I want to just touch on emotional control, where on the one hand, destructive cults will make you feel really special and chosen, and make you feel like you're part of the elite. On the other hand, it's a lot about guilt and fear manipulation. And I find that the ultimate mind control methodology is phobia induction, where they implant irrational fears in people's minds that if they question the group or the leader, or want to leave the group, terrible things are going to happen to you. So that in the mind of a member of a destructive cult, you can't imagine leaving and being happy and fulfilled. You can only imagine leaving and being miserable, suffering in hell, being possessed by demons, becoming a drug addict.
It's incredibly abusive. It's an incredibly terrible seed to plant, especially in young people. A lot of us grew up with the fear of hell and demons and for the slightest transgressions. And I just think it's one of the most insanely terrible manipulations that parents and or societies
agree. I completely agree. And I teach my clients, because this is what I do for a living, is I help people who've exited recover. And I also guide families and friends who want to rescue someone out of a cult. And I coach them on how to do that. I have something called the strategic interactive approach. But it's absolutely vital for anyone who's been exposed to a mind control cult to understand the concept of a phobia and how it's different from real fear, where there's an actual danger. Like, don't touch the third rail at the railway station because you'll get electrocuted. Like, that should be fearful, right? So you stay away from it.
It's a healthy fear.
Yeah, versus somebody drawing a chalk line on a carpet and saying, don't step on this, you're going to be electrocuted.
Right.
And for me, any group that says they know what reality is and what's going to happen after we die, we all know we die as human beings, or any sentient life dies. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen, you say, prove it.
Yes.
Prove it, and I'll believe it. If you can't prove it, and it's a story. And is this a story that's helpful for me in terms of my ability to live my life, or is it helpful for the institution because you'll stay loyal and you'll give money to them and you'll recruit for them and you'll do their bidding for them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
We did a segment with our mutual friend, Dr. Chrissy Stroop, and about the rapture anxiety.
Yep.
About people who are really have their whole lives struggled with the fact that if they got home and their family was gone, they're like, oh fuck, they're gone. The rapture.
Right.
If it's and what an insane thing to drill into the head of a perfectly normal human being.
Yeah, and I do want to tell your listeners I was raised Jewish, so I did not know anything about Satan or demons or rapture. I really didn't have any close friends until college who were not Jewish. And it seemed to me at the time like that was insane. And how could anyone believe that? But then I got recruited into the Moonies, and that's what I believe too.
Yeah, it's just absolutely insidious. So now that, people understand some of the kind of diagnostic ways to look at a yardstick maybe that the BITE model provides to kind of look at things they were or are involved with as perhaps dangerous or insidious. Let's talk about what we got the most correspondence of from any segment we've ever done. And it was extremely insidious, and that is a very obscure cult called the Anthill Kids. Now, I'll do a very quick primer for people who did not listen to our episode number 128. And if you haven't, be warned, it's a fucking nightmare. But a guy named Roch Theriault, I believe pronounced his name, split off from the Seventh-day Adventists in the late 70s and started a tiny apocalyptic cult in rural Quebec. And what followed was a sadistic vision of hell Dante never dreamed of, with murder, mutilation, starvation, rape and molestation of every sort. And people not only stayed when Theriault was, normally in a drunken stupor, and they easily could have escaped, and he also sometimes traveled here to Utah, lucky us, for weeks at a time, so they could have escaped then. Or even worse, some of his most grievously wounded victims would escape only to return to the cult within days of their horrible dismemberments. So after all that correspondence, Steve, we got so much, we had such a response. I told our listeners I would try to get you on to answer the burning question, which is, how can something like this go on and on? Like, how could this self-perpetuate for the years that it did?
So, where to start in just a short amount of time to explain? I guess what I want to start with is that human beings are organisms that need information. We have five senses, and we're socialized from birth. And we're very adaptable and flexible, and we are hardwired for survival choices. We're hardwired genetically to follow who we think are legitimate leaders. We're hardwired to follow our peers, people that we identify with, and use them as a measuring stick for what reality is. So that's the baseline. Now, learning social psychology, learning neuroscience, learning psychology gives you a toolbox to step beyond our programming and to understand things like mind control and undue influence and brainwashing. But without that knowledge, people do the best they can to adapt and to survive. With that as the beginning, what I would next say is that from my experience and then 44 years of activism working with folks, what the best model to explain it is what's called a dissociative disorder model, which means that, for example, using me, there was the Steve Hassan that I grew up as, the youngest of 3 kids, 2 older sisters, my mom and my dad in Queens, New York. And then I got into the Moonies, and now Moon and his wife were my true parents.
Right.
And Milton and Estelle were only my physical parents. And I was, that identity was of Satan. And so the cult identity then was trained to suppress the old identity as evil, as my fallen nature. And I was trained to do things like thought stopping and emotion blocking to stay true to the leader and the doctrine and the organization.
Right.
So this suppression of your own intelligence, your own conscience, your own critical faculties is a core feature of destructive mind control cults. I've already mentioned the BITE model, and I think that if you go through the BITE model, which is all on my website, freedomofmind.com, and look at that particular cult, you'll see that their behavior was controlled, their information was controlled, their thoughts were controlled, and their emotions were controlled, all to be dependent and obedient on who they came to believe was a prophet, someone who was a special person of God, who prophesied the Armageddon and the end of the earth, and that only by doing what he told you would you be saved. And that frame, that ideology, was co-opting people's sense of survival in the sense of having their arms chopped off or their testicles amputated without anesthesia. And again,
so you're familiar with his work.
Well, yes. Unfortunately, in this business, I'm asked often to do interviews about all types of cults I'd never heard of, and But the analysis always fits, because if you understand, for example, cognitive dissonance, if you do an extreme behavior, the beliefs are going to rationalize that behavior. Right. And in a mind control cult, the leader claims to be perfect. Even this guy was a drunkard and would have, alcoholic binges and then apologize.
Right.
But, people were basically suppressing their own common sense, critical thinking, and deferring to, this is God's choice for me. This is a test. This is a trial. They may have any number of justifications for why to stay involved. It seems he was a major womanizer. Yeah, I would predict he clearly had a very traumatized childhood where he was physically abused and maybe sexually abused as well. And he used sex as a technique to break down people's sense of self, to get them to do things he wanted them to do, including pedophilia.
Right.
And so that's the recipe generically for mind control cults, whether they're religious cults, political cults, therapy cults, or just a cult of personality, which is really how I think of this particular cult. It's a cult of personality where he kind of picked and chose different beliefs from other religions and other cults.
Yeah, he was kind of a magpie. He just made it. It seemed like he kind of winged it.
And people will believe what they want to believe. and someone who has some charisma, and supposedly had penetrating eyes, which makes me wonder if he had any training in hypnosis. But if he looks you in the eyes and says, you are my wife, eternal wife, and out of 9, you are my wife and I love you and no one can love you like me. And we are connected for eternity. I know as ex-Mormons, that rap, that, eternal marriages. It's very powerful to keep you in that system. In all of your interviews, have you come across anyone talking about sunk cost fallacy?
We've definitely talked about the sunk cost fallacy, and I was going to ask you about that. If you feel like that is why some of these people, even like this poor woman who was literally had her arm hacked off and then returned, if you feel, her sunk cost was pretty profound at that point, right?
It is. Or, it really, you've invested this much and then you've invested a year, you've invested 2 years, you've invested 10 years. Now you have children with this guy,
right?
Who all look like him, right?
Right.
I just recently watched with my wife Tiger King on Netflix.
It's got kind of a cult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of them.
all these tigers. What is it about tigers that does this to people?
I actually met Bhagwan Antle, who was...
You did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he would bring his creatures to a place called King Richard's Fair in Carver, Massachusetts, which is in the fall. And I just fell in love with tigers and ligers. He also had an elephant. And
you're very vulnerable to cults, Stephen.
I love animals. They are entrancing. I'm a major, talk about cults. I am a major scuba diver cult person who loves being underwater and floating and looking at gorgeous things.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a good cult. I highly approve.
It costs money, and you got to fly there, and you got to observe the safety precautions because
got to control your breathing. It's all in the bite model.
But I love scuba diving.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you one last question, Stephen.
Sure.
While I've long known you were a Moonie, it wasn't until recently I learned from watching a video interview with you that you personally knew the second coming of Christ, the perfected Adam, the Reverend Moon himself.
Yeah, I don't like anyone calling him a reverend because he was self-ordained. He said,
well,
he has no.
It's all made up.
No credentials, but yeah, no. I was groomed to be the leader, a top leader in the United States, and got to meet him and listen to him in person many, many, many times over the 2.5 years.
Wow.
And it was actually that exposure to him that helped me in my deprogramming because...
You saw him as a person?
Well, I saw that what we were told as leaders was very different than what he was telling the members or what he was telling the outside world.
Right.
And that dissonance helped to eventually wake me up to, wait a minute, he's a liar.
Right.
And if he's a liar, how can he be trustworthy? And if he's a liar, how could he be God's agent on earth? Because we teach God as a God of truth. So it was that kind of, basic reasoning that started coming back online for me that helped me to exit. And then I scratched my head and said, how did this happen to me? How did I come to believe such insane beliefs and do such horrible things as a cult member?
Well, I think a lot of us who came out of it still scratch our heads, and just wonder how we, the three of us were raised in it. You had a slightly different thing, but it's the same for all kinds of converts, right?
Yeah, I think you get more of a pass than me because I had a very strong, clear identity and value system. And I read 1984 and I learned about the Holocaust and Hitler. I knew about authoritarianism, but it still happened to me.
Isn't that
Whereas
crazy?
you were socialized in it by your family. So in my opinion, you get more of a pass for having been raised. And I give you kudos for waking up and going, you know what? I don't choose to believe in stories that make no sense or that are based on lies.
Yeah, no, it takes courage sometimes for people to do it, but it's great when they finally do. But I wanted to ask you one final thing about Reverend or Sun Myung Moon.
Sun Myung Moon, thank you.
When we did our segment on the Moonies and the Unification Church, I discovered that he'd traveled to all 48 contiguous states in a blue station wagon and buried a piece of sacred Korean soil in each. So please tell me you know where he did this in Utah. You've got to tell me.
I don't know where he did it. I don't know where he did it in Utah, and I think that's a story that may not be true.
Oh, bummer.
But Moonies believe Korea is God's chosen nation, and
right, yeah,
and that everyone would speak Korean, and all other religions will be wiped out by us meaning the Moonies. When we took power, Moon said that democracy was satanic, and he wanted a theocracy with him and his children and his surrogate children, which was the believers, to take over and run the world.
Well, they're almost there. I think they're on the edge.
Well, people don't realize they're still around. They have a gun factory in the U.S., in Pennsylvania. Yeah. They own the Washington Times newspaper and UPI. Yeah. And they're still very active with lots of different names and front groups. They don't use
we saw their
church anymore.
We saw their blessing of the machine gun service by Stoneman Douglas High School or in Florida after the shooting, which is insane. So, well, it's been a lovely pleasure to talk to you, Steven. Where can our listeners find you and your good work? You've mentioned it before, but if you want to talk about what the latest stuff is.
Yeah, I want to invite everybody to check out my website, freedomofmind.com. I'm on Twitter at cultexpert, and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. And I'm concerned, broadly about human rights and wishing people to be educated consumers and to understand how the mind works and how to understand if they're getting disinformation, to not believe disinformation or propaganda, and reality test and use your critical thinking. And if something's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate the good work you're doing. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks. Continued success.
Yes. Take care.
Well, friends, that's it for this week's show.
Hey, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, howto@howtoheretic.com, maybe with a picture of you in a gauzy dress.
Yeah, or if you were one of the 14,000 cast members of the Ten Commandments, why not leave us a voicemail on your old and timey telephone at 903-88-HOW-TO, which is 903-884-6986. I'm also on the old-timey Twitter telephone at HowToHeretic.
And as always, thanks to our amazing, amazing patrons.
And thanks so much to our cult leader, Cody Layton, for editing the show.
And thanks to all of you, dear friends, for tuning in.
Bye.
Hosanna. Hosanna. Hosanna.